Yeah, without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Eric Rosenbush, who is a research affiliate here at RYI and is also one of our Sanskrit instructors during the summer program. Dr. Eric Rosenbush practices and researches the ancient sciences of Asia. This encompasses the classical texts and living lineages of Tibetan, Ayurvedic, and Chinese traditional medicines, as well as jyotisha and Indian classical music. He completed master's and doctoral programs in Chinese medicine, in addition to many years of studies and clinical training with senior doctors and masters. Currently based in Nepal, Eric is head of the research and translation department at the Sowa Rigpa International College and president of the Drangsong Foundation. So please give a warm welcome to Dr. Eric Rosenbush.
Hi. Can you guys hear me? Okay, great. Wow. It's such a pleasure to be here with you guys. And thanks for coming out on this rainy monsoon day here in Kathmandu. So yeah, let's get started. So it's always auspicious to start with some type of auspicious verse. Chomdende Deshin Shekpa Menki La Beduya Uki Gyopola Chaktselo. So, yeah, that's an opening invocation to the medicine Buddha, Vaidurya Utkigelpo, also known as Vaishajya Guru Vaidurya Prabharaja. So that actually is the first verse in one of my favorite books that I'm going to talk more about later today. And it's originally a Sanskrit book. But the Sanskrit book doesn't have that opening verse. Only the Tibetan version added that extra medicine Buddha prayer. So here's the opening prayer in the Sanskrit version. Ragadi rogan satatan ushaktan asheshakaya prasritan asheshan otsukya moharatidan jagana yo purva vaidyaya namostu tasmai. And the translation is quite beautiful because this is actually really the heart of what we're talking about today. Homage to that original or primordial doctor or healer who eliminated without any residue, with nothing left, completely eliminated all of the diseases that are rooted in raga and adi, right? Rooted in our desire and attachment, right? So these diseases are rooted from our mind and from our karma and so on, which spread throughout the body, creating anxiety, confusion, and agitation or discontent, right? So when we talk about the connection between Dharma, Buddhist Dharma especially, and the medicine, actually, this is right here in the very beginning of one of the most important Ayurvedic books. It says homage to that original healer, right? Which, you know, in the Tibetan version and interpretation, that is medicine Buddha, right? The original healer who heals us not just of the diseases of our body, but the deeper diseases of our karmic negativities and our kleshas and everything else, right? So then what is this disease and what is this healing that we're experiencing, right? So that verse is the opening of what's called the Ashtanga Hriya Samhita, right? The heart of the 8 branches of medicine, which in Tibetan is the Yenlak Gepe Ningpo Dupa, right? One of the most important medical texts, both in Sanskrit and Tibetan languages. And here's one more opening prayer. This is to Yutok. Yutok was the founder of the Tibetan medical system, right? We'll talk more about him in a minute. And this is a great prayer to him from Jamgung Kongtrul. Dusung Gyalkun Sangwa Chiktu Pa, Lama Mempe Gyalpo Yutok Pa, Ninkon Rupe Tingne Sowa Deb, Kusung Tugi Jingji Lo Padang, Chotan Tumong Ngodrub Seldu So. Right? So we pray for Yutok's blessings for our endeavors and for healing and so on. So as Andy already said, this is me. Some of the different things that I do, in addition to now being on this Sanskrit faculty here, such an honor to be part of Rongjung Yeshe. And in addition, I work mainly with medicine, right? medical text, clinical practice. And then especially we have a college of Tibetan medicine that's not too far from here called the Sowa Rigpa International College, right? Which is actually the first and only accredited degree program in the Sowa Rigpa, the science of Tibetan medicine here in Nepal. Okay. So we'll start our little journey, right? Talking about this connection between Buddhist Dharma and the healing or the medical tradition, right? So first, we'll talk a little bit about references and the connection of medicine with the early Buddhist tradition, okay? So I don't know Pali at all. So I have some Pali quotes. These are just copy paste, right? I know nothing about Pali, but still in English, we can find so much, right? And actually from the very beginning of the root of Buddhism, there's so much of a close connection with the medical science as well as the science of the Buddha Dharma, right? So let's see first, the Four Noble Truths themselves, right? The heart of Buddhism, right? When Shakyamuni turned the Dharma chakra in Sarnath, in Kashi, Varanasi, right? This was this original teaching, right? And actually, even the structure of this Four Noble Truths is like a medical metaphor, right? It says, okay, we identify the disease. What's the disease? Of course, here the diseases are suffering, or samsara, and so on, right? Then we need to know the cause of the disease. What's the etiology? What's the pathogenesis? Then we need to see, okay, what is the process of healing this disease, right? Once we understand this therapeutic process, then we can apply and we can choose and rely upon the therapy itself. So you can say, right, this whole systematic presentation of Buddhist philosophy is also basically modeling medical science, right? It's the same basic idea, using logic, principles of cause and effect, philosophical principles to understand how to make a positive change. Of course, in medicine, we're talking more about the physical body, more about temporary causes and effects, right? Temporary manifestations. Whereas in this like Adhyatma Dharma, right? In the spiritual teachings from whatever tradition, it's talking from a little bit bigger picture, right? Beyond just our temporary experiences, right? But what is going to make us happy in a much longer or a much more lasting kind of way, right? But we can still see there's so much of a overlap, right? And then likewise, we see so often in the Buddhist, these teachings and scriptures and so on, they say we should rely upon the Buddha like the doctor, right? So he's the one that can make this diagnosis, write the prescription. That's called his, the Buddha's method, right? And then the Dharma is the medicine itself, right? And then you rely upon the Sangha as the nurse or the assistants, the ones that are supporting you going through this healing process or therapeutic process, right? So like that, it's all over the tradition, even from the early times. Likewise, if we continue, medicine in the Pali tradition, right? And you can say also maybe some early Sanskrit Buddhism kind of mixed with this too. There's so many medical references in the Sutra and Vinaya literature, right? One, for example, is the names of the diseases, right? I think, and this is something, I like speaking here to you all because this is, a school that's teaching people to translate, right? And actually, I have to say that the translation of medical concepts is much, much behind the translation of other types of terms and concepts, right? There is really a big gap in understanding what some medical terms mean. And it's even the dictionaries are kind of all over the place. Translations are a little bit random, right? Because actually every disease category, right, and every disease name has a very specific meaning, right? We can put some kind of modern equivalence on that, but it's not an exact correspondence, right? When we see a name of a disease that you find in a Buddhist sutra, right, from 2000 something years ago, and you find in an Ayurvedic Shastra from 1000 years ago, and you find the same word translated to Tibetan from a few hundred years ago, right? There is a continuity of a concept. And then if we try to kind of just match it to an allopathic disease definition, actually we lose a lot of the meaning. Of course, there is a lot of overlap too, right? But we have to be a little bit more precise in understanding medical terminology. I'm talking to the community of the translators themselves, right? Because yeah, and this is something that's difficult because, you know, how to say, to understand the medical terms, you have to also understand a little bit more about how the medicine works. And it's not just like a museum relic. This is actually a living science that has been going on for thousands of years and is still applied. The same books, the same words are still used to treat the patients now, right? And it's fascinating because it's not like, you know, many people say, oh, now times are so different. Now we have new diseases, right? We're so different than people in the past. Actually, we're not really that different from people in the past. Sure, we have a lot of new chemicals, right? We have a lot of new other things that we do, but the basis of what it means to be alive, the fluctuations of health and disease, and the basic parameters of physiology and pathology, you know, they haven't changed since we've been human beings, right? So likewise, we can learn a lot. You know, I think there is a common kind of stereotype in the West. I think because Western culture has a little bit of a funny relationship to its own traditional medicine. There's this kind of idea that, oh, when we developed industrialized medicine, right, then everything that came before must have been so bad and so stupid, right? We have no basis of that statement, right? And a lot of that, of course, there's some things that there's always new developments, new understanding, right? But actually a lot of that's also, you know, politics and propaganda and media stuff too. We always have this idea that right now we know what's best and everything that came before was very silly, especially in the West, right? So I think that attitude is very strong, kind of against pre-20th century Western medicine, right? But yet in the West, people really venerate Asian medicine, which is an interesting thing. You know, very few people want to study like Galen and Hippocrates, Ibn Sina, and all these amazing masters of ancient Greek medicine, Persian medicine, even though we just assume that everything that they say is nonsense, and that when we discovered antibiotics, then everything just got discredited, that everyone who practiced as a doctor for thousands of years didn't do any good, right? So there's these funny biases in our head. So, and I think that continues even in the world of translation of Dharma things too, right? So I think it's an interesting thing looking at our biases, right? Anyway, disease categories still used in Sowa Rigpa and Ayurveda, including the idea of the Nyepa, what you can say is the three doshas, or the different humors, right? Which are kind of a physiological and pathological basic framework that we see body health and disease in, right? Then there's many references to medical plants, different pharmacological preparations, right? Even from the time of Shakyamuni Buddha in the Vinaya Sutras, right? They're talking about, oh, the monks, yeah, you can make this medicine and this decoction and these things. And actually they're using the same language that we use in Ayurveda and Sowa Rigpa, Tibetan medicine, right? Then likewise, there's references to therapeutic techniques, including things like panchakarma, right? Shodhana upakrama, right? This kind of purging and detoxification, which is more common in Ayurvedic tradition, but very much also exists in the Sowa Rigpa Tibetan tradition. So let's see, without going too much into it, here's just a quote I found. There's some cute sutras, right? I don't know if it's appropriate to call the Buddha's words sutras cute inside of the monastery, but like this is called the Vamana Sutra, right? Vamana means therapeutic emesis, like vomiting therapy. Sometimes, I think you guys have all experienced, right? If you eat some bad food, if you can vomit it out, actually you feel so much better. And even other kinds of illnesses, sometimes we use therapeutic vomiting, very effective for many types of things, right? Even today, right? And you can say, oh, this guy is talking some strange things. Actually, if you need scientific validation, right? Hundreds and hundreds of research studies being published by Ayurveda colleges about use of these types of therapies for all different types of disease. So you can't say it's not like evidence informed in these things, because actually people are doing these studies and it's actually quite systematic. But anyway, the Buddha was saying, yeah, we have diseases of the three humors, right? Lung, Tripa, Bekken. Vata, Pitta, Kapha, bile, phlegm, and wind, right? It's a little bit too much to explain what that means here, but that's kind of a basis of how disease works. And it says there are some treatments where you can give this emesis. Sometimes it works, but not 100%, right? But my Dharma, that's the perfect vomiting therapy, right? If you learn how to vomit out all of your nonsense, right? Then you get rid of all the nonsense and then you're going to be enlightened, right? So like that, there's a lot of these metaphors. There's another sutra, which is like the Purgation Sutra. And it's basically the same thing, saying, oh, if you don't, you can take the purgative medicine, right? Go to the toilet so many times, clean out everything inside of you. But my teachings are going to purge you of all your confusion and all your negative emotions. And it's actually amazing like that, right? Any of you guys that have actually gone through these processes physically through your body, when you actually are releasing the stuff out of your system, it really pulls up these emotions and pulls up all this stuff that's stuck in your body too. So actually the things really go together, right? We say this like body, speech, and mind are yermil, right? Are inseparable. So I think it's a kind of fashion now, I think especially in the West, right? Where people, they study these Dharma things, right? And it's very much in your head. It's very intellectual, right? And it's so much like these mental things. Of course, there's so much of that in the Buddha Dharma and other type of spiritual cultivation, right? But I think the important thing too is to understand that body, speech, or energy and mind, they're actually linked together. And if your body's not healthy, it's very hard to really do things with your mind, right? We have to work with that interdependence, right? Of course, we can try as hard as we can to like mind over matter, right? My body is so miserable. I'm eating bad quality food, and yet I think I'm going to meditate and be happy. Of course, we need to take care of body too, right? So I think this is an important part that often gets left out because these are things that people often, especially from the past, considered like cultural stuff, right? There was the pure Buddhist philosophy, right? Pure Hindu philosophy, pure Taoist philosophy. And then there's the religious stuff and the cultural stuff. And a lot of, especially when the European colonialists came, they wanted to take just the scripture and just this kind of thing, which also is wonderful, right? There's so much positive things, so much things we can learn from that too. Maybe there's a benefit to separating the things also. But aspects like medicine actually are more dealing with our relative phenomena, right? Then just focusing only on ultimate truth can be difficult. So it's useful that we can kind of have these skillful means that we can work with our body, work with our health, understanding the food, understanding our elements, help to understand ourself, right? We can look at our mind and our emotions all the time, but some of our emotions are coming from our organs too. So if we don't pay attention to our liver that's making us angry, we can just meditate on our anger all day and the anger is not going to go anywhere, right? So that's why we kind of need to bridge the things from our head like down to the ground sometimes too. And this is especially for the Western students or modern students. I shouldn't discriminate. I think East Asian students could be just as modern as the American or European or South Asians too. Okay, yeah, here's the rest of that sutra, right? For one of right freedom, wrong freedom is vomited up. Right? It's really nice. I love this sutra. Okay, so then a little bit more about this like ancient first layer of Buddhism. We have someone named Jivaka, right? Soche Shuno. Some of you guys have heard of Jivaka? Anyone have been to Thailand before? So, right, Jivaka, he is the patron of Thai medicine, right? Basically, Jivaka, they said he studied in Takshashila University, which is currently in Pakistan, right? This was one of the great universities in the ancient world, right? Where he learned from Atreya, right? Atreya was a very famous name all over the Ayurvedic texts. Whether there's one Atreya, lots of Atreyas, anyway, it doesn't matter. Atri is one of the great rishis, right? One of the 7 important rishis of the Vedas, right? 7 stars of the Big Dipper. And then Atreya would be the descendants of the lineage of Atri Rishi, right? So supposedly even Jivaka, he learned about brain surgery. In his biography, there's case studies of him doing brain surgery. right? So they had all these kind of knowledge. Then later, he was living in Magadha, right? They said he had a place with a beautiful mango grove, and he was good buddies with the Buddha. So he was the doctor for the Buddha and for many of the Buddha Sangha. And there's a bunch of the old original sutras that said, oh, one day the Buddha and all his followers, they were hanging out in Jivaka's mango grove. And then they had this conversation, right? There's like the Jivaka Sutra, and there's lots of other sutras like that. So anyway, then the story is, or the tradition says, that his lineage then carried to Southeast Asia, to the Khmer civilization, to the Thai civilization, right? Became the basis of Thai medicine, right? And likewise, his lineage also went to Tibet. We say that Jivaka later reincarnated as Yutuk, right? The founder of the Tibetan medical system. And in Yutuk's biography, it says how he had visions of Jivaka and he met Jivaka in these different times, right? His biography is really nice. So that's a little bit about this kind of first phase, right? Then we have classical Ayurveda, right? Classical Ayurveda, that's, you can say the main corpus of South Asian medical literature is in the Sanskrit language, right? And that is what is the Ayurvedic lineage. But, we should understand that this is a technology, right? This is not a sectarian thing. It's not that, like, even nowadays, right? Biology is not owned by a certain Christian denomination that runs a certain university that has biology department, right? Knowledge transcends a lot of these things, especially useful knowledge, right? Like medicine. So here, we can talk about what they call in Tibetan these rikne, right? What we can say the classical sciences. So in these great universities like Nalanda and these things, right? This was the curriculum, right? And this is also very similar to what we have in the kind of Sanatana Dharma, the Hindu tradition of the Vedangas, right? The limbs of the Veda, right? Where they compartmentalize knowledge in different places. In the West, we have the trivium, quadrivium, and these things. Similar way, they are splitting knowledge. These are the departments from ancient times. So, right? Anyway, I'm not going to go too much into all these different divisions, but we have our third one is what's called Chikitsa Vidya, right? Sowa Rigpa, the science of healing, right? So that's our medical science. So all of the great universities, centers of learning, monasteries, not just Buddhist, but from all different parts of South Asia and different lineages and so on, all would have studied the science of healing, right? And then finally, we have the fifth one on the top, the internal science, Adhyatma Vidya, Nangdong Rigpa, right? That inner science is the science of spirituality, right? That's the inner knowledge. We can say the first four are the outer sciences. The last one is the inner science, understanding reality, right? The other ones are more focused on external relative reality. Fifth one is more about ultimate reality, right? More about understanding the deeper aspects of how things are and how we can have experiential realization of them, right? And then there's the minor sciences, which include this like astronomy, astrology, all these types of things. Okay, then we have, again, my favorite book that I talked about in the beginning, the Ashtanga Hridaya, right? The heart of the 8 branches of medicine. So this we call one of the Brihat Trayi, the 3 great treatises of classical Ayurveda. The other 2, Charaka and Sushruta, they are much older, many centuries, if not millennia before, right? And then Ashtanga Hridaya was written likely around the 7th century, right? So this was the first one that really has a clear historical place, right? And what this Ashtanga Hridaya does is it takes a lot of, the other books are actually much bigger, more complicated, more philosophical, right? And more elaborated. Ashtanga Hridaya takes the essence of those other texts, systemizes them in very, very beautiful poetic Sanskrit verse, and writes a really practical instruction manual for treating of the patients. So this became actually the biggest export, Ayurvedic export, right? Before we had Dabur and Himalaya Drug Company exporting these products, right? We exported, Ayurveda exported this Ashtanga Hridaya. Why do I say that? It was translated to Latin language, to Persian language. We'll talk about how it was translated to Tibetan language, right? So it became the base of how a lot of Ayurveda was kind of shown to other local civilizations. So people think that he was likely originally a Kashmiri, right? The story was that he became a Buddhist, moved to the far south of India, especially Kerala in the Malabar area, during the later part of his life. But there's a lot of questions. Some say there's multiple Vagbhatas, the grandfather and the grandson, we don't need to get into all this stuff, right? But that's the tradition. And then supposedly when he settled in Kerala, he taught some families, and they became what's called the Ashtavaidya tradition. Ashta means 8, right? So they're the holders of the 8 branches of medicine. So even today, this Ashtanga Hridaya is especially down there the primary text used as a medical manual. Other parts of India will use other books as well, right? We'll still study this, but especially there, they really focus on this Ashtanga, right? And then, so the text is likely from the late or post-Gupta dynasty period, which was almost like a Tang dynasty of India, right? It was like a really high cultural flourishing. There was a lot of cosmopolitan influence. There is syncretic references, so you can see both Vedic or Hindu as well as Buddhist elements in the text, right? In terms of different prayers and mantras and concepts and these things. So it came from a very kind of open-minded, pluralistic phase in Indian history, right? So then Rinchen Songpo in the 10th, 11th century translated that text to Tibetan, along with a few commentaries, especially the ones that were prevalent in Kashmir, right? Because Kashmir was actually the main place where Rinchen Songpo was working. It's quite close to that area of Ladakh, Spiti, Ngari, right? Where he was in that region. So especially we have some commentary by the great master Chandranandana, and we have this Ashtanga Nigantu, the Materia Medica connected to Ashtanga Hridaya. So those were translated into Tibetan, incorporated into the Tibetan canon, our Tengyur, right? So even now you go to any Tibetan monastery, they'll have the wall of the pechas, wall of volumes of books. This book and a few of the commentaries are inside of that, right? Not many people read it, but it's been preserved, right? As the great shastras of the Indian masters that were translated to Tibet, right? And so this was very influential in the development of the Sowa Rigpa, the Tibetan and Himalayan medical system. And then the 4 tantras, the Pelden Gyushi, right, which is our main textbook of Tibetan medicine, we'll talk about in a moment. We can see a lot of influence from Ashtanga Hridaya into the 4 tantras, right? So that's actually, that's what I like to study, because I'm personally, I find to understand as living clinical transmissions. If we can understand how these Sanskrit concepts then evolved and went to Tibet, then developed and became their own thing in Tibet, also mixing with East Asian medicine, some elements of Persian, Greek medicine, right? Then we can understand a lot about how we can help the patients, how we can understand ourselves, health and disease, and so on. So some other aspects of Indian medicine, Indian Buddhism and medicine is we have the great master Nagarjuna, right? Any of you guys who goes to study here at Rangjung Yeshe, right? You'll talk so much about Nagarjuna, right? I think all the Tibetan Buddhists, they love Nagarjuna, right? With his Uma, the middle way philosophy, Madhyamaka, right? Which is especially kind of expounding the Prajnaparamita teachings about emptiness and these things, right? But also Nagarjuna was a great doctor and an alchemist, right? The story said he lived more than 1,000 years, I think, right? If you read his biography, it's really interesting. Of course, people say, well, maybe there was many Nagarjunas. Anyway, that doesn't matter for us too, right? So there are many great medical books attributed to Nagarjuna as well as alchemical books. Nagarjuna was from the Sri Shailam area, right? In the current day, I forget if it's Andhra Pradesh or Telangana. I don't know, the states split and I don't know which one is which, but in kind of not so far from Hyderabad, right? So that was the area that Nagarjuna came from. And even to this day, we can say we have the Sri Shailam or the Nagarjuna type of alchemical school. So in doing alchemical processes with minerals and detoxification of substances, there's a lot of influence from Nagarjuna's teachings, right? And that's kind of the tradition that's rooted from that part of India, right? And so there's a few other books that we have in the Tengdur, like Yoga Shataka, the 100 combinations, the Jiva Sutra, another basic book on health and healing. And then unfortunately, we don't have a Tibetan version of a book that I really love called Rasa Vaisheshika. And that's a really great book talking about, what's that? Oh, sorry. Rasa Vaisheshika, yeah. So Rasa Vaisheshika talks all about how to understand all of the plants, properties of the plants, understand the qualities of all the substances. Wonderful book, right? So that's a little bit about Indian Buddhist medicine and its relation, Indian Buddhism and medicine and their connection. Okay, now we can talk second part of the talk. We can talk about Sowa Rigpa, the science of healing in Tibet and the Himalayan areas, right? Maybe first, you guys have any question on that first stuff that we were talking about? No question online, huh? Yes, please.
A lot of the medical texts talk about a lot of. So a lot of medicine texts in India talk about extensive preparations of certain medicines. And as you said, that it's sort of a continuum and it is being used even today in India.
Yes.
But as an Indian myself, I don't know how much I can rely on Dabur and Himalaya, these brands, or
Yes.
even Ramdev's brand, for example.
Correct.
Even though India has a ministry of Ayur and all that.
Correct.
However, in those texts, I heard that it's very elaborate processes, and sometimes there is talk of mercury and all those things and burning. And have we understood them, how to perform those steps? Do we have that? Is the practical part also transmitted to the continuous tradition, or is it just the textual sort of?
Okay, yeah, that is a really great question. So one, what is the status of that transmission, the ancient lineage of transmission for the last couple thousand years? Where does it stand today? And then the question is, what about the quality of the materia medica substance? And then furthermore about the alchemical procedures, detoxification of toxic substances, and whether medicines can be trusted, right? Yeah, no, these are big issues. And I think probably, let's see, what's the right way to address this? Starting with the lineage, right? 100%, there is an unbroken lineage that you can find throughout South Asia, right? Of transmission of classical Ayurvedic medicine through, through many, many generations, right? So we can say family traditions, we have local traditions, and then we have what has become the standardized curriculum Ayurveda, right? That is, basically the same here in Nepal as well as in India, where there is a set syllabus, a curriculum. It's a 5.5-year course to get what's called the BAMS, right? The Bachelor of Ayurvedic Medicine and Surgery. And there are very specific things that are learned. So of course, trying to, nothing is perfect in the world. There are people that are doing absolutely amazing things with Ayurveda. And I'll say just classical medicine in general, but your question was about Ayurveda in South Asia. So there are people that are doing amazing treatments with Ayurveda. I mean, including, not just care of chronic diseases, but also management of acute diseases, emergency cases, many things that people would be surprised are even within the scope of practice, that are there in the original texts and people still hold traditional lineages of. So that is there. However, those things are not necessarily the majority. In fact, they're quite the minority oftentimes. There's a lot of challenges that are being faced with these medicines, one being in places where they potentially can serve billions of people, right? So, and then you have to create standardized educational systems that basically need to be a lowest common denominator that will ensure someone is safely able to practice, right? So there are people doing amazing things, but it's not, but you have to search and find them. And also within South Asia, there are some areas where Ayurveda is highly respected, a primary source of healthcare for a lot of people, with very high quality medicinal substances being produced and used. There's other places where the tradition is less respected. There's less of a public adaptation of it. Honestly, we have a big challenge is that with the standard medical entrance examinations and things like that, people that try to go for to become allopathic doctors, they don't get high enough test scores. Then Ayurveda becomes a second tier choice for people that still want to be doctors. Maybe they don't really care about Ayurveda. Maybe they don't want to learn Sanskrit. And then there's this pressure to become scientific, right? Which of course has its good part too, but in one aspect, we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater also, right? Where, there are really important things in the tradition that are getting kind of overlooked in this attempt to validate everything so that people won't judge things as much. So there's a lot of issues, right? I'm honestly hopeful because even though it may be a minority, there are amazing Ayurvedic doctors, there are amazing Ayurvedic scholars, researchers. Of course, we'll get to Tibetan medicine in a second too, but overall, I have a positive outlook. The other question you asked was about the materia medica, about the herbal substances. And that is something really we need to be careful about. Whenever you need to produce anything commercially and you're getting into like many, many tons of output, right? It is impossible to really have that high of a quality standard, right? And then when there's economic incentives too, where patients don't want to pay a lot of money for herbs, actually the herbs should be more expensive than they are. If they're artificially cheap, that means that they're produced too cheaply, which means the sources aren't proper, which means that there's a lot of quality issues, especially in raw material sourcing and these things. So that's actually been one of the main things I've done personally for these last couple decades, is working with trying to find good, sustainable solutions for ensuring the quality of a lot of the herbal plants, and especially the ones that are threatened by exploitation from wild resources. So there are brands of Ayurvedic medicines that I totally do trust. And there are ones that honestly, I really do not trust. So you have to be really careful. Yeah, no, but that's a great question. And then one more brief thing about the third question is about toxic substances, heavy metals, and so on. I think one really big misconception I want to clear up: we can have two types of heavy metal content in herbal medicine, right? One is heavy metal contamination, right? So you harvest some herbs, maybe there was some pollution, there was some residue of some other toxic substances, there was subpar manufacturing equipment, and from there, some heavy metals go into the medicine. That is contamination. That is something very different than the use of toxic substances according to the tradition, right? So a lot of criticisms, first of all, don't acknowledge that difference. You read research reports and they say, oh, this herb was found to contain lead and mercury, but lead and mercury are not ingredients in that formula, right? They were plant products that were just contaminated. Granted, like, a lot of our vegetables have heavy metals and contamination too, especially, in this part of the world. So that's one thing. Then the second thing is the actual use of metallic substances, plants with some toxic properties, and so on. And for that, there is a whole system of detoxification. And there are many pharmacies and doctors that go through the full process of doing that. It's elaborate, time-intensive, and expensive. So when you buy many cheap, mass-produced Ayurvedic medicines that have metals as an ingredient, it's hard to know if those were produced taking some shortcuts. And those, I think, are potentially could be dangerous. In terms of exactly biochemically what's happening, exactly what the toxicities are, there actually in every Ayurveda college, there will be a pharmacology and alchemical medicine department. And they are doing so many studies. I mean, if you search on the internet, you find hundreds and hundreds of studies about, you know, whether from animal studies or human studies, looking at different types of toxicity and things like that. So I think the research is ongoing. When my personal feeling is that likely if one is really following the traditional protocols, there is likely much less toxicity or no toxicity, even compared to allopathic medicine, for sure not. But for sure, Ayurvedic medicine especially gets a lot of bad rap for that, right? And I think it's important to really distinguish and differentiate, right? I would not recommend patients to take a lot of over-the-counter mercurial medicines, but some of these same medicines made really in a good way are used by probably thousands of clinics on hundreds of thousands, if not more patients with very successful results every day, right? Especially here in South Asia, where as traditional medicine, they're protected and legal. I think the hard science is just not out. So it's not that it's proven to be toxic. There's a lot of things that just have not had the type of, multi-million-dollar toxicity studies that are needed to validate whether or not it's toxic, right? So we need to really be clear about these things. And this is the same in Tibetan medicine, because we have what's called the precious pills in Tibetan medicine, which are also, many of them are having, gold and some other metals that are alchemically purified. They're actually turned into ash, and they are broken down. Actually, now a lot of current research says that it's probably broken down into nanoparticles because they are incinerated ground so many times, mixed with different things, where actually you don't have the free metals. They're all bound in other types of compounds, right? And honestly, I don't think chemistry completely understands what they're doing. There's aspects of alchemy that chemistry just doesn't understand it, right? So it's a fascinating subject for sure. Okay, Tibetan medicine. Yeah, so first, origins and transmissions. I talked a little bit about, you can say, one of the streams of origin of Tibetan medicine is the South Asian medicine from India and Nepal that went along with Buddhism from Sanskrit and other local languages, right, into Tibet, right? We have like this Ashtanga Hridaya and other kind of texts and things like that, right? Then we have other origins as well. We have indigenous medicine of the Tibetan plateau, right? People have been living in Tibet for tens of thousands of years. It's not like someone had to come from India to teach them, like, how to patch a wound, right? There's a lot of references, really fascinating references from the Bön tradition, the pre-Buddhist tradition, as well as a lot of local traditions in nomad country and so on, about use of different plants, use of minerals, many types of external applications, treating of all different types of disorders and so on, right? So that's the one very big root. Then we also have the influence of Greek medicine, Indo-Greek medicine from Central Asia, right? Through the Persians, through, these Sogdians and, all these guys and, to the northwest of India, right? That was the point where Greek and Indian culture met together. And we have a lot of Greek influence in Sowa Rigpa as well. And then finally is East Asian medicine, right? The Chinese medical tradition. There are many things that are shared in common with Chinese and Tibetan medicine. Exactly when they came from where to where, maybe they were shared in common for thousands of years. Maybe there was certain times in Chinese history where things or concepts were brought. These things need further research, right? But we can say a really special thing about Tibetan medicine is that it contains, it's like the integrated bridge between Ayurveda, Chinese medicine, and ancient Western medicine, and throw some Bumpo kind of nomad shamanic medicine in there too, right? So that's one of the really unique things about Tibetan medicine. But when we talk kind of the classical history of Tibetan medicine, we start with this great master, Yutok Yunten Gompo. You can see by his dates, he lived over 125 years, right? So he was a great master of the 8th century, said to have visited India many times and traveled all over the place. He liked to walk, right? And his Namtar, his biography is really great. And he was said to have then established the first medical school, right? Right, there's many great stories about him. Then Yutok was said to reincarnate again in the 12th century, right? And this is what we call the younger Yutok, right? And the second Yutok, or younger Yutok, he was, he was the one that really systematized the tradition of Tibetan medicine that we have, right? So what he did was he compiled and edited what's called the 4 Medical Tantras, which is our main textbook, right? Which has a lot of influence from the Ashtanga Hridaya, from other places. And that became like the main book of Sowa Rigpa. So if you go now, whether from northeastern Tibetan Amdo to central Tibetan Lhasa to Bhutan to Mongolia to all over India to Nepal, right? That's the main curriculum of Tibetan medical education. It's called, and that was really thanks to Yutok. And Yutok also was a Ngakpa. He was a yogi, right? And so Yutok also had his Dharma tradition called the Yutok Ningtik, right? And that's the tradition that traditionally was kind of like the secret meditation practice that Tibetan doctors did. And the fascinating thing about the Yutok Ningtik and the Yutok's tradition in general is it's totally remade. You can find it in Gelugpa, Sakya, Drikong, Karmakagyu, I don't know Jonangpa, but definitely it's mainly Nyingmapa, right? And even we have so much about the Drangsong, about the rishis, right? So even it's got Hindu stuff in there too. I think this is the original and the most remade lineage in Tibet. It's got Dzogpa Chempo, it's got Chakcha Chempo, it's got 6 yogas, it's got all kinds of things, divination. It's an amazing tradition. And the book is actually quite small, but it's very, very pithy. So you can tell I'm a big fan, right? You know who else was a big fan? Dudjom Rinpoche Jigdrel Yeshe Dorje. So this is Dudjom Rinpoche's kind of munlam at the beginning of one Yutok Ningtik book. So I'll just read. Sorry, my Tibetan translation is probably not so great, but Om Swasti, the medicine Buddha, king of medicine, emanates in the form of a bodhisattva householder who manifests as a Nirmanakaya in the land of snows, the Himalayas. Known as the Rishi Yutok Yunten Gompo, his fame resounds as melody throughout all existence. From the expanse of his wisdom mind naturally bursts forth the blissful sweet path, the elixir of secret mantra, a stream of the nectar of oral instructions unifying the oral lineage and terma treasure transmission known as the heart essence of Yutok, the Yutok Ningtik. Unmistaken path of ripening and liberating, auspicious and complete, fortunate ones keeping this tradition in its completion are an inspiration to all with merit, holders of the science of longevity. And here they say Ayurveda, right? Tserikpa. Literally, he says the science of Ayurveda. May auspicious and fortune flourish. And from excellent wishes alone, generate supreme accomplishment. Arising from that inexhaustible accumulation of merit, may all beings who have a connection completely ripen, and may this long-established tradition have unwaning glory. By Dudjom Rinpoche. So if you doubt Yutok Ningtik, it's got the Dudjom seal of approval. So Nyingmapas, you can't argue with that, right? Okay. So this was the book, The Glorious 4 Tantras. And as you can see, these trees, this book has a really unique system where it uses these it's like a living outline where the main books are like the different trunks of the tree and the branches are the primary sections. Then you have the leaves are the individual chapters. Likewise, the whole medical system is like a garden, right? Where we have many different trees. There's actually 99 trees that the whole medical system is encoded into. Yeah, it's really cool, right? So that's the 4 tantras. This is our first tree. I don't know if you guys can see it clearly. This is actually in the waiting room of a Sowa Rigpa clinic in Tibet. You can say in Tibet, right, Sowa Rigpa is really established. There are big hospitals, pharmacies, so many colleges, doctors. It's really flourishing, right? So that's one thing, of course, in Tibet, there's so many different dynamics, right? But the Sowa Rigpa tradition is really something really strong there, right? So this is our first tree. This is everything, the principles of health and disease, right? Everything about what is a healthy body, what are the principles of disease, are all the leaves and branches of this tree. That's what we call the root tantra, right? So a couple other little things. We can say that medicine itself is its own philosophical system, right? If you study the different siddhantas, the different darshanas, right? In Buddhist studies, like here in Rangjung Yeshe, you'll go through, okay, Sutrantika, Vaisheshika, right? All these different things, the classical Indian ones, the Buddhist ones. Really, we should say that the medical tradition is its own darshan, its own system, right? Because it has its own philosophical outlook, right? And yeah, this is another huge topic, right? The difference between contemporary, like the modern science view of reality, life, and health versus the classical Asian medical view. Of course, there's some things very, very distinct. Even like, what does it mean to be alive? Right? If you ask a biologist, what does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to be conscious? They can tell you everything else, but they can't tell you that. They don't know what life is. They don't know what death is. They don't know what consciousness is, right? But they can study everything else in a lot of detail, right? In Asian medicine, I think it's the understanding of what life is and what consciousness is. This is shared with the spiritual traditions, right? The theory of the mind and consciousness. This we would share with whatever other spiritual tradition. Here in Tibetan medicine, it's with Vajrayana, right? So Vajrayana views of embodiment, views of the nature of mind and wisdom consciousness, and how that is embodied, right? That is like the fundamental principles underneath our medical system, right? So for example, we have the law of karma, cause and effect, right? We have the idea that there are subtle principles, tendril, right, that are acting beneath the fabric of our normal causation, right? Likewise, the idea of a kind of materialistic, rational, reductionistic, nihilistic view, which is kind of the religion of modern science, has very different outlook, right? It's convinced that the body must be a meat machine, right? And there's nothing else beside that. Of course, now it's maybe different, but this has been, especially in 20th century, a very strong prevailing bias in modern medicine, right? Anyway, that's a bigger subject. All right, we don't have so much time, and as usual, I have way too many slides, so I'll just go through a few others. So these are some ideas about the body, right? This again, so Sowa Rigpa, one other really nice thing is Sowa Rigpa has a beautiful system of tanka illustrations. So the whole medical system is illustrated. So these are illustrations of the body, right? And you can see like we have these streams here, right? This is the energy of the breath coming in the nostrils, which is the lung, the prana, the vayu, right? And that then permeates into our different channels and chakras, right? So this is really like the Vajra body view, right? So we can see the body as like made up of tissues, flesh, blood, and so on. We can also see the body is made up of a bunch of energy, prana, bindus, and these things, right? We actually have many simultaneous views of the body. Okay. And this starts with conception, right? The idea is that there's an interdependent connection of one is karma, right? All the interdependent karmic forces that lead this bardo consciousness, the being that had died in a previous life and is now on its journey to finding its next womb, right? That bardo consciousness links with the essence of the mother and father, right? There has to be a karmic link where the three things then come together, right? So you have maternal ancestors, paternal ancestors, right? Which are summarized in their red and white tigles, right? Then the namshe, right? The consciousness of the being, along with the very subtle prana. All of these come together to create life, right? From that, then the 5 elements form, we go through these amazing process of embryology and so on, and then we're born as these embodied living beings, right? So within that, then the body is made up of these different channels. So we have actually a lot of different types of channels, right? Anyone that's ever studied anatomy, right? You'll see our body is made up of so many tubes, right? Lots of tubes within tubes, from a cellular level, you know, to a gross level, where lots of tubes and lots of pathways of things, right? So likewise, in the Sowa Rigpa, we also talk about that. We talk about the ways that nutrients and fluids and blood, body waste products are metabolized, all these ways that things are flowing, right? They talk about nerves, tendons, blood vessels, and so on. But then there's also the subtle channels, right? The channels more from the Vajrayana side, right? The yogic channels, right? Which you can see also here, right? So we have the heart chakra, which is connected to the 8 different branches connected to different types of consciousness linked to mental function and so on. So it's really a beautiful bridge between, you can say, yogic tantric physiology and then the straight material body, right? And that liminal space is part of what makes Sowa Rigpa such a powerful system, right? Do you find this in Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine? Some places, right? But it's less overt. This is much more, this is just how it is. You can find lineages of Ayurvedic and Chinese medicine that are more connected to Tantra, Yoga Shastra, Taoism, and so on, right? But it's not the standard. In Tibetan medicine, this is because maybe it's also a later thing, right? It's a later transmission. It's very much united with the Vajrayana. So that's something very special. Other tradition kind of like that would be the Siddha tradition of Tamil Nadu. It's also very, very mixed with this yogic physiology, the nadis, chakras, and these things, right? And actually there is a lot of correspondence between especially Siddha medicine and Kerala Kalari medicine and these things with aspects of Tibetan medicine, which is also really fascinating and kind of not been studied much, right? So that's something I'm also really interested in. All right, then I have so many other slides. What else can we say quickly? We can say the origin of disease, right? So according to Sowa Rigpa, again, because we're talking about Buddhism and medicine together, we can say, what's the root of disease? The root of your problems is that first, because you're in samsara. Because you're in samsara, then what happens? You're born in a human body, right? And then being born in a human body, you have imbalances of these things. What are all of they rooted in? According to Buddhist philosophy, it's marigpa. It's ignorant, fundamental ignorance. Due to that, we have the 3 mental poisons. We create the kleshas, right? Due to our anger, we are born with a lot of heat in our body, right? And we can have different types of disease that come from this aggravated anger that gets congealed and karmically creates liver problems and things like that, right? So we really take everything back to that original source. This is something also very unique in the Tibetan medicine, right? And then, of course, there's a whole system of actual physiology, pathology, how diseases generate, how we can do the therapies and so on. So first, we need to recognize the disease, right? We need to do a good diagnosis, right? And let me just show you about diagnosis. This is our tree of diagnosis, right? So this is another tree I showed you. This is actually our second big tree. So I'll just zoom in a little bit to show you guys, because this is lots of fun. If I can find it. There we go. Right, so you can see these are tongues, right? So this is understanding the different principles of tongue diagnosis, right? Then we have here, these are the different pulses, right? Basic principles of pulse analysis. Sorry, this is urine analysis. Tibetan medicine is very incredibly precise at urine analysis, right? Then we have pulse diagnosis, and then anamnesis, asking different questions to the patient and so on. And then up here, we have the lineage masters, right? And who are these? These are our Drangsong. These are our great rishis, right? The same rishis who wrote the Ayurvedic books. They are the lineage masters of Sowa Rigpa, right? And then we have a lot of Buddhist guys too, but they're mostly Indian rishis. And then also these different devatas too, right? We have Ganesha here, Kartikeya, and all these guys, right? So this is part of our lineage because it came from India, right, into Tibet, like that. So I thought you guys would appreciate that. Then, oh, how do I get back to my slideshow? Play, okay. And then, yeah, we're almost done. So these are our main therapeutic tools, right? I'll just describe them quickly, right? We can say once we've understood the disease, right? And also to understand, we need to understand about the causes of disease. And that's a whole other subject, right? What are the things that lead to our diseases, right? We can have things in our body, also our mental states, right? A lot of mental, emotional states can lead to the formation of disease, but then also a very clear system of understanding diet, lifestyle, seasonal actions, right? Even karmic forces, ancestral genetic factors that are causes that lead to the disease, right? So now that we've diagnosed it, we need to then apply our therapeutics. And so we get another tree, therapeutic tree, right? 4 main therapies are using diet, lifestyle, herbal medicine, and external therapies. Okay, so here's just some ideas. Like now we are in monsoon season, right? So monsoon season, there's certain special lifestyle factors that we want to do. These aren't necessarily to treat the disease, but this is how we as individuals can find balance with the outer nature, right? So we need to be in harmony with the nature. Just like the plants and animals, they have their cycles through the seasons, right? As humans, we also need to know what type of food to eat, what types of things we should do, right? What kind of ways that we can stay healthy. And again, the goal is not just to stay healthy now, because what happens, especially for modern people, we don't realize that the reason we're sick tomorrow is not because of what we did today. It's because of what we did a couple months ago that's been building up, right? We're very short-sighted. We even don't remember what we ate last week, no? So like that, we say oftentimes, what you do in this season might affect you in the next season or even the season after that, right? And then the patients say, oh, I am healthy, this and that. We don't remember all the bad stuff we did like last month, right? So we really need to have a wide approach, wide view. So that's a lifestyle. We have an amazing system of herbal medicine. In Tibetan medicine, we use a lot of high altitude Himalayan herbs, as well as a lot of tropical medicines, things that were historically traded. A whole nother subject we can talk about. Then we have external therapies, right? External therapies include things like manual therapy, like an oil massage, different types of points, right? We have moxibustion, bloodletting, acupuncture, even surgical techniques, right? These are all in the realm of the external therapy treatments, right? And yes, there was a tradition of many types of surgical things done in Tibet, yeah, so yeah, there's a lot of knowledge, right? Not just in the books, but in the people's hands too. And then just to kind of close up, we can also say that we have the tantric aspects of medicine, right? In the Vajrayana, where we can use different types of rituals, we can use other types of means to deal with the sources of our disease. And especially, like maybe you guys have noticed for yourselves or other family members, sometimes it's even hard to find a good doctor, hard to get a good diagnosis. Everyone's confused. These are the times when sometimes we need some help with rituals and this stuff, because there might be some karmic obstacles, right? Then you can do these things, and then all of a sudden it becomes clear what's the therapy you need. Not just Tibetan medicine, even modern medicine or whatever, right? But sometimes it's like in the realm of cause and effect, there's things, invisible things that have to get taken care of to be able to kind of, find the healing that we need. Not to mention also just for our own internal transformation, right? Then we have this rejuvenation practice called the Chulen, right? Which includes many different types of spiritual practices too, as well as medical things. right? A lot of things include yogic practices, breathing, special medicinal substances, fasting, and things like that, right? And they can be useful for so many different things, right? Anti-aging, rejuvenation, infertility treatments, and so on. So that's a whole department of this kind of revitalization medicine. And then finally, to conclude, right? What is health? So we've talked a lot about this kind of very, very broad overview of like all of the medicine of South Asia and the Himalayas in the last couple thousand years, in the last hour and 5 minutes, right? So at the end of the day, really, what is health, right? Health, you can say, is something not just feeling good temporarily in your physical body, right? You also want your mind to be healthy, right? You also want your karma to be healthy, right? Your karmic traces, your bakchak, right? These things all need to be kind of clean, right? Then we are not going to have this, like, say we have a garden. We've pulled up all the weeds, but there's still all these seeds of other weeds that are going to sprout. Is that really a healthy garden? If the next time it rains, some other like stupid weeds are going to start growing. I shouldn't insult the plants, but you know what I'm saying. So like that, right? We need to really find this lasting health, right? And that's with the spiritual practice too. That's why having the healthy body, healthy mind, and healthy energy, or lung, are very much intertwined together. So you can say the pinnacle of health is that guy in the middle there. What is that? That's Jalu, the rainbow body, right? Especially from the ancient traditions of Tibet, right? The highest state of enlightenment means that you have completely sublimated, completely purified, and transmuted your gross physicality, your gross 5-element substance, your gross mind, your gross emotions, and you are just nothing but pure luminosity. Okay? So that is in Sowa Rigpa as well as in Dharma, right? The essence of the highest state of health, right? And most rainbow body masters, many of them also did a lot of Chulen practices, fasting, right? They were doing yoga things, so they're actually physically transforming their body too. Right? So I'll leave you all with that. That's the end of my slideshow marathon. Thank you. Let's see. Any questions? Yes, please.
Thank you for your presentation. And you said in
Yes.
I'm very want to know how you relate to medicine.
Ooh, good question. Okay, that's a whole nother ocean. So jyotisha is it's kartsi in Tibetan, right? It's you can translate it like astrology, but it's not like the horoscope you read in the newspaper, right? So this is actually also it's a whole other massive science that where you can understand through understanding time and the qualities of time, you can understand our karmas, our experiences in life and these things. Your question is, how does the medicine relate to Jyotish? So, of course, what's going to happen in our body, like we say in the Buddhist philosophy, right? Everything is interdependently connected. So you can say the Jyotish is like one map or of like your curriculum of what possibilities you might experience, what the seasons might be, what certain tendencies might come at certain times, right? But of course, then it depends what we do with it, right? So we still have some aspect where we are in control. It's like when the rain is coming, do we stay home? Do we bring our umbrella? Or do we go outside and get wet and then my computer gets all soaked and breaks? If we know that the rain is coming, right, then we can have umbrella or we can kind of plan better, right? So I think that's one good metaphor. But in terms of understanding medicine, I find that jyotisha and tools like that, including different type of mo, divination, and these things, right? They're very useful when diseases are difficult, when we don't know what to do. The doctors are confused. Nothing is working, right? We don't really know what the source of the problem is. Then through that lens, we might find some other thing that we might be able to have some other treatment with or some other solution for. Okay. Any other question? Yes, please.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. I'm surprised that I haven't heard about it before, Eric. Yeah, I have like 15 questions right here.
Okay.
But I'm just gonna ask you like two important questions, I think.
Sure.
Maybe you can answer shortly. So one is, so in Tibetan medicine, because it is based on Buddha Dharma, the philosophy that you just said is that the cause of disease is ignorance.
Huh.
So within that philosophical framework, then how do you explain how the Buddha had a back pain, or like great teachers also have diseases, right? So why should they have diseases? And then the second question is, so you talked about how Tibetan doctors, they are good at good with urine analysis as well, right?
Correct.
But I've gone to many Tibetan doctors, and no one has actually asked for like urine sample. So I'm wondering like where we can get a complete package in Nepal, right? Where they actually do like a full analysis. I mean, I'm sure many of us would like to pay a full premium price for that kind of package. Yeah, I've actually never encountered that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So let me answer your second question first about a urine analysis, right? So of course, there's so many ways to analyze. We can analyze with all our sense organs, right? Some people can just look at the patient and then from that understand. Some people even dream about the patient and then know what the diagnosis is. Other people can be really good at feeling pulse, right? Or really good at just asking the questions, they get the understanding. So it's not like you need to use every single method every single time, right? So that's one thing. There's some very, very, very experienced Tibetan doctors here. Just because they don't ask you for your urine sample doesn't mean that you're missing something out. Then why is urine analysis not as popular? It is popular in some of the doctors in India, like for example, the late great Yeshe Dundan. He really emphasized urine a lot. He did a lot of urine analysis. Likewise, many other doctors trained in Mensikang in Dharamsala, many are doing urine analysis, right? So it's not that it's not there. I think one aspect is logistics. When you're managing a busy clinic, to deal with urine is messy and smelly, and like you need a space to clean it and then wash your hands and then, it's just messy. I love to check people's urine, but again, yeah, you really need to have a good facility. And so I think that's one of the primary things. Yeah, and then I think it might just be kind of fashion, where because I asked some of the amchis, right? I was like, why do you not check the urine? And they often say, well, because people don't bring me the urine. So then they don't ask for it, so maybe if they really needed, they would ask you, but with the pulse and the questions, or maybe some palpation or observation, you can see many things. So don't worry, you're not missing out. There's actually many other diagnostic techniques too. And then for your first question, right? Why the Buddha got stomach pain, why the Buddha had to eat his poison pork and die and all these things, right? I don't know if it's heretical, but not heretical, but do you guys know Swami Vivekananda? Right? He has a quote I really like. Good, good, bad, bad, none will escape the law. He who wears the form must also bear the chain. What does that mean? If you are incarnated, doesn't matter what troku, what avatar, right? Whoever you are, if you are born in a physical body, you are going to have a birth chart. You're going to have Saturn and Rahu making some trouble. You're going to have some challenges in your life, right? We're going to have some karma that needs to be experienced in this physical body, right? The difference between if you read the biographies of the great masters, so many of them had so many physical sufferings. That doesn't say anything about what their mind was experiencing though, right? This was just the karma they had for that body, of the karmas that body needed to experience, right? Does that help? Kind of. Okay. Next, is there any more question?
I would actually like to ask a question.
Yeah, sure.
So elemental balance is considered a sort of important concept in medicine. So I would hope that you could say a little bit more about that. Like, for example, if somebody has an air imbalance, are they prescribed earth? If they have a water imbalance, are they prescribed fire?
Yeah, that's a very good question. We didn't really talk about elements so much, right? So right? We can say that we each have our own special constitution, right? Like sometimes I like to say, like, if you look at the photo of a little baby and you see that photo, the same person when they're 20 years old, when they're 50 years old, when they're 80 years old, you see it's kind of the same person. One aspect, their personality is still kind of the same, right? Their facial structure, their bone structure, no matter what happened. Of course, if they were run over by a truck, then maybe their facial structure would change. But like, you know, in general, you can see there's this kind of continuity, right? That's what we call our rangshin or our prakriti, our each individual's special nature. So we quantify that or qualify that in terms of elements, right? And we can say 5 elements, we can say 3 humors, 3 nyepas, doshas, whatever. There's different systems that we can kind of qualify how our individual makeup is, right? So that's the base. Then in addition to that, everything we do in our life, right? The foods that we eat, our emotional things, our lifestyle, you know, where we're living, right? Everything we're doing is also making an impact on our body, is also changing our 5 elements, right? And that's what can lead us out of balance, right? So nowadays people are so stressed, right? We say we're doing a lot of things that are tsup or ruksha. It's like they're rough, agitating in nature, right? We're exposed to stressful stimuli, right? Whether it's like assault on our senses, whether it's our thought patterns, whether it's our lifestyle, unhealthy habits. You guys in the summer program, you have so much homework, right? Have to learn a whole language in 8 weeks, right? All of you guys, right? So this is all, it's like almost when you're riding on a car with bad shocks on a bumpy road, right? And it's kind of shaking you up. We say that is wind element. It's creating more like roughness, dryness, chaotic stuff in our body, right? So what's the antidote for that, right? In general, we use the doctrine of balancing, right? So if the body is getting more agitated, right? If the body is getting more rough and dried out, then what do we need? We need the opposite. We need smooth, we need nourishing, we need grounding, warm, right? And we often summarize those as like oily or nutritious. So that's why something like oil massage is very good, or eating warm, kind of comforting, nourishing foods, because that balances out that internal kind of agitated dryness. Same way, sometimes when we're too hot, we need to cool the body down. When we're too cool, we need to warm the body up. But that is a very, very, very big oversimplification, because in reality, we have to understand the entire mechanism of physiology and pathology, right? We have to really have a deeper understanding of what's happening. But in general, we are using opposites. There are some times where we use a more almost homeopathic approach, where we use like to treat like, right? The person is having a hot nature disorder, but we still use hot natured therapy, right? Because that is what the person needs to clear that heat out or to resolve it in whatever way. But I'd say in Sowa Rigpa's therapeutic approach, the majority is using kind of antidotes, using the opposites. Okay, is that clear? Yeah. Yes, please.
I was wondering, what's like Sowa Rigpa or Tibetan medicine's take on disability? I think in like Western like medical institutions, there's always this notion of like a normative standard of health, or like you know, being a person of full abilities,
Right.
which leads to like ableism. And I wonder
Yeah.
how the Tibetan or the paradigms that you have talked today
Sure.
like may respond differently to this kind of
Yeah,
thinking.
that's a really great question, right? So yeah, you can say that, of course, how many beings are there in the universe, right? Even on our planet, how many types of beings? What, 84 zillion or something, right? You put the 84 to make it like a Buddhist thing, because they always put 84, right? But so many species, right? So many types of beings having so many types of experience. So I think that understanding of the unique experience of each individual is the foundation. So really, the medical system is built on the idea that we are all unique individual beings, and we have to understand ourselves, right? So some people's experience of their life on this planet will be different, right? Even though they're born in human body, they don't have the same faculties as other humans, right? So then they have to find their unique way to find their health and their unique way to find their best functional state and their optimum state of well-being that they can find. So I think one really nice thing about Sowa Rigpa tradition, and you can say these medicines in general, is really there's not judgment. There's not like a standardization kind of thing. It's really everyone, each individual being is trying to unfold its own wisdom nature. And it has its consciousness and it has its body, right? And the body is just an expression of whatever karmic experiences to have a body that the consciousness kind of is inhabiting for this life. Does that help? Okay. Yeah. Yes. Oh, sorry?
Match at 1-2.
Hi.
In parallel to how different yogas and different physical exercises are tailored for different illnesses, are there any meditations and mental exercises that are also prescribed for different illnesses? And if there are, how niche and one-to-one do they get?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And that kind of goes into the larger theme of what we're supposed to be talking about, is the link of how Buddhism and medicine intertwine. So you can say, especially in the Tibetan tradition, but in so many, you can say so many of these spiritual traditions from this part of the world, there are a kind of menu, or there's a palette of different practices that can be done, right? And usually your dharmic guide can instruct you on, oh, for you, for the nature of your mind, for the nature of what you're experiencing, you should do that practice, right? So that's more in the domain of like what a lama or a spiritual teacher will tell somebody, right? But yet also from the medical perspective, just as we said, right, there's the different elements, right? Some people, if you're having, for example, more wind element, your mind has a tendency towards distraction, right? Wind element is not stable, right? You look at the fans blowing the wind around the room, right? Wind is always moving, and it's hard to really contain. So a very windy person, if you tell him, okay, you need to be 100%, like you can't move and you have to like, there's certain things that will just make them go nuts, right? Because that's not their nature. Maybe they need to do something with also incorporating some movement, or they need to do things, maybe do short meditation sessions or something like that, because maybe their attention span is more, they're more creative, sensitive types. So their attention wants to go all over the place. So trying to make them sit for 3 hours is not going to necessarily help, especially if it's just kind of a daily thing. So like that, we can, of course, tailor what type of meditation somebody does, what type of exercise they do to match our analysis, to match our diagnosis, right? And with that, I think it really helps to understand people's minds, understand what's really underneath their actions, right? Are from emotional states, psychological states, and things like that. And then, especially if you're talking about meditation practice, there's so much link with that stuff. So yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Yes, please.
I'll take a question from our online participant.
Okay.
Can we find any information about rainbow body in Tibetan medicine?
If you read Utok's biographies, both Utok's biographies, they talk about how they were Jalupas, right? In terms of, you guys know that are familiar with this whole rainbow body thing, this is one of the subjects that is the least talked about, right? So there are some good books in English that are talking more from the Dharma perspective and studies and so on, but in terms of specifically from the medical perspective, maybe in the commentary literature, there'll be some references. But yeah, sorry, I don't have anything more specific to point you to. The Art of Good Karma by my Tibetan medicine teacher, Dr. Nida Chenaksang. So he talks also about that. But again, this is more a contemporary thing. But yeah, he talks about that quite a bit. Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, can you give us some take-home simple things we can do for good health
Ooh,
from all your traditions?
So vomiting and purging. What are you gonna vomit and purge? Confusion, your negative emotions, right? I think especially for modern people, learning how to let go is really important, right? We're always trying to hold on to stuff, but the more we can let things go, right, then the lighter we can be, and then the happier we can be, right? It's just like you, because you guys are mostly Buddhist philosophy students, right? What is the reason we're not experiencing our Buddha nature? It's because of the avarana. It's because they're covered, they're obscured. What's obscuring it? All of our nonsense, right? So like that, we need to, the more we can just not take ourselves seriously, right? And just take life lightly and yeah, let go of whatever we're holding on to, not just mentally, but that manifests in our body physiologically. Like actually, like let things go, right? I think that's the easiest thing, but somehow we make it the hardest thing. And then of course, you know, eat well, exercise, get sleep, don't get too stressed out. Yeah.
That's a perfect note to end
Okay.
the guest lecture on. Thank you, Doctor. Can we give a round of applause for Dr. Rosenbush?